Hello, everyone. Welcome back into MLS Digest. I'm Camille, your host, and we're here to preview Week 12 of the MLS season, coming your way May 10th and 11th. And this past midweek, we had U.S. Open Cup action in the round of 32, which was the first round of this year's edition to feature MLS sides playing. Only 16 MLS sides were featuring in this year's edition and were allowed to or considered getting in. With some teams opting out and other things like that, with other competitions as well going on. And 15 out of those 16 teams advanced to the round of 16, which will be coming up next week, and so on and so forth. So we'll go over all of that, and of course also get you everything you need to know for Week 12 coming up for all 30 teams that are in action, because it's a pretty packed and congested schedule coming up in these next couple of weeks, with a midweek slate following this weekend slate, and then another weekend slate for week 14, and then eventually that round of 16 of the Open Cup. So teams will be very much, the ones that are in it, rotating a lot and having to deal with that schedule congestion. So let's just get into everything you need to know. Before we do, please make sure to like the video down below and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I really appreciate your support. The first game of Saturday's slate is between the Fire and Atlanta, and both these teams sitting below the playoff line at the moment, especially for Atlanta. That continues this terrible start to this season. They're winless in at least their last 5, as you can see. And the Fire were in Open Cup action midweek. They got to host Detroit City and fielded a pretty strong lineup, at least from an attacking perspective, with Bamba and Kuiper starting, and got the job done early and scored 4 to put away Detroit City 4-0 for a pretty straightforward win against the USL side. And they'll match up with the Revs in the round of 16. And for the first best bet, I'm going with the over 3.5 here. Kind of a high total instead of the 3, but I really like these odds. Chicago is one of 4 teams during the upcoming midweek, again, because this is going to be one of the first midweek slates, I think, of the entire season so far, where they are a team on a bye, and so they don't have to worry about over rotating with that extra game in mind. And so I think they still feel the full lineup here. And at home, yes, they've had 2 0-0 draws lately, but they're still second worst in terms of expected goals allowed, and still in that kind of top 10 for their own metrics from an attacking standpoint in expected goals. Atlanta, their metrics aren't all that solid, but defensively still they lack a lot. And on the other end, Chicago at home still has yet to register a win, and so they, besides those 0-0 draws, they've really had issues with holding leads when they've gotten out to them, and those games have tended to be a little bit higher scoring. And I think that 0-0 against Orlando was more so on Orlando's side, and the fact that Chicago got a red card from Chris Brady very early on into that match. So it was impressive for them to hold on to even a point for about an hour there, down a man. And the man getting that red card was Chris Brady, the goalkeeper, who has been an elite shot stopper this year. And so they signed Brian Dowd, had to sign him because had to bring him back from his loan and terminate that loan to be able to get some other sort of goalkeeper here for this game. And so I think this is an opportunity as well for Atlanta to bounce back from an attacking perspective. They're pretty healthy on that side of things. Still uncertain about Gregerson and Muyumba, who are 2 key cogs in that defensive shell, and they're probably expected to be missing here again. But from an attacking perspective, I think Atlanta can definitely kind of exercise some demons, get rid of some woes against this really pitiful Chicago defense, which the back line there, not even just Brady, in net, the back line there has been pretty decimated recently, with Tehran getting injured. Barroso's been out for at least a month, playing Dean there now at right back a little bit. And so also from an attacking perspective, like I said, the Fire should be all good, all ready to go. And so I like goals in this one. I think Chicago probably should be pulling out the win in this one, just based on Atlanta's horrendous form. But I think they've also played some much better defensive sides in this run that has kind of emphasized and kind of pointed out some of their attacking problems more so. So this is a spot where they could bounce back, and it's kind of hard to predict this one. I'm going to say the Fire do get their first home win of the season, but as we've seen. Besides the 2-0 draws, if they score, the other team scores, it usually is a goal fest. And I think for these odds, even though it is that extra half total, we need 4 in this one. I think both should have no problem getting 2. And this one should be a fun one to start off the slate. Next up is a pretty interesting cross-conference matchup between Minnesota and Miami. Minnesota played in Open Cup midweek at Louisville City, but honestly, it was mostly their reserves playing, so not too many starters got a lot of run, and they ended up advancing 1-0. Meanwhile, Miami is not an Open Cup, so they had their normal rest from last weekend, where they obviously destroyed Red Bulls 4-1 at home, bouncing back from obviously getting eliminated from Champions Cup. And so now, right now, this is really their sole focus. And both these teams should be healthy, well rested. And I expect a pretty good matchup here. We know Minnesota is going to give Miami the ball. Miami loves to have possession. Minnesota hates it. They have the least possession rate in the league going into this week by the metrics. And that works out against some teams, but some teams can be deadly with the ball, as we've seen with Vancouver, Miami. And both these teams defensively are some of the best in terms of their expected goals allowed and how little they're giving up. Miami has definitely improved from that standpoint. I still don't think they're elite, but they're definitely a little bit better. But Minnesota now getting Julian Gressel, who's gotten some play. He got play in the Open Cup game. He came from Miami because he hasn't been used in Miami with Tata Martino at the end of his stint there, and then whatsoever so far this season with Mascherano. And so Minnesota got him, and he's going to fit perfectly in their system with these wingbacks that might allow Hlongwane to maybe play up top again instead of playing right back. And you can kind of mix and match in Ramsey's system here. So I think this could tend to be a lower scoring game, but I think Miami will just have enough. We've seen Minnesota come up against another elite attacking team and possession team in Vancouver, who was also on little rest at the time. And eventually Vancouver broke through, and it just depends on the pace and the energy that Miami plays with, because I think if they do bring that energy, they can definitely kind of unlock Minnesota's low block and not get kind of too hurt by their counterattacks and just give them really no opportunities to get on the break. But if they do, then certainly Minnesota's pace could hurt some of Miami's back line. But Miami's well rested. They only have this competition to focus on right now until we get into the later summer months with Leagues Cup and all that. So I think they're going to put their full effort in here, and they'll just scrape by with the victory. I'm going to say 2-1 to Miami. Toronto and DC face off as two of the East's worst teams. These teams played, I believe, in opening week, where it was a 2-2 draw in DC, and Toronto just one win in their last 5, just one win this season. Meanwhile, DC, some pretty good results recently, especially last week, coming back to beat Colorado, and then also played an Open Cup, winning 2-0 against Charleston, but it took them to extra time, so they played that extra half hour before getting the win over the USL side, and they'll play Charlotte in the round of 16. And they also have to travel here as well to Toronto, which has been well rested since they got knocked out early in that Canadian Cup to Montreal. And as we know, Toronto, the worst team by the attacking metrics in terms of XG in the entire league. DC is kind of leveled down in terms of their own XG. They're kind of middle of the pack. Meanwhile, their defense has definitely been worse than Toronto's. Toronto's games have been very one-sided and low scoring, whether it be one side or the other. But I think Toronto has a good chance to finally get their first home win of the season. Once again, they played a very stingy New England side last time out, and were punished by the class and quality of the better players on the field in Carles Hill and Campagna. And even though Benteke is back, which was a surprise to me last week because I didn't expect him to play last week, and then he burned us in that game against Colorado. Still, DC United without a couple of other key players like Peglau, Bartlett on that back line, and with the travel, with that extra game, it was kind of a 50-50 lineup out of DC in that U.S. Open Cup game in terms of being full strength, but eventually they did make some subs, and kind of almost everyone got some run because of the fact that it went to extra time. So I think Toronto just has the edge in this one, being at home, staying at home, a little bit extra rest just in general for this whole squad. Osorio is injured though, So that could be a big loss in that midfield. And it's just one that it's very hard to predict. But I think Toronto will get a little bit of revenge, I guess you could call it, and pick up its first home win of the season. I'm not really confident about it. These are two really lackluster teams dealing with injuries and all these other sorts of things, and playing to kind of avoid being one of those wooden spoon contenders. So I'm going to go with a 2-1 Toronto win. Moving on, we have another cross-conference matchup. It's Cincinnati taking on Austin, and Cincinnati, who was the hottest team entering last week, going on a 5-win streak, finally lost all 3 points, actually, not even, picking up a draw. They lost to NYCFC on the road, went down early, could have been on 2-0 early, but a penalty was missed. And then really, it's just kind of that NYC tax when it comes to playing on that baseball field. Like, I don't know what it was, but Cincinnati was certainly second best in that game, didn't look themselves. But I think they'll bounce back in this one against an Austin side that has looked pretty suspect as of late. 3 losses in the last 5 in MLS play, including back-to-back losses without scoring. And I don't think it's a coincidence that with Pereira going down in that Houston game, and then obviously he's going to be injured for a while and didn't play in that Minnesota game, and just with the way this team really kind of lives its life on the edge in terms of its score lines and its complete tactics. Like, it's usually one way or the other with this team, and once they get behind, it's very, very difficult for this team to come back because that attacking spark just isn't there. Estevez hasn't really implemented that kind of system where they play with a little bit of freedom. It's a bit too predictable. And they also had a U.S. Open Cup game midweek against El Paso. It was at home, but they went down 2-0, did come back eventually to win in 90 minutes, but played a pretty decent lineup. I mean, Brandon Vasquez played the whole way. Bukhari eventually came on at halftime since they were down. And besides that, I mean, most of this lineup had to play or was subbed on in some capacity due to the fact that the result was absolutely in question before they eventually came back. But, going on the road here now on less rest against the Cincinnati side that I think is going to be motivated to bounce back from that loss at NYC. I think this is an elite Cincinnati side. They're getting, like I said, very, very healthy again. And Wobedo is expected to be back, day-to-day. Meanwhile, one of the other players, I believe it's Buka, is expected to be back and has been training. Other than that, there's really no injuries to speak of. So I think Cincinnati at home has been pretty elite, getting the job done. Maybe a couple 1-0 score lines, and that could be the case here, maybe 1-0, 2-0. But I just really don't trust Austin to score. Austin's defense has been their bread and butter, but Cincinnati as well, with this fully restored back line and the system, really doesn't give up too much with this system, and especially at home. So while maybe the under could be another good play here, since I don't really expect Austin to pose any sort of attacking challenge to Cincinnati, and could just make it difficult and try and pray and come out there with a 0-0 point. I think Cincinnati will get at them early. They're going to have the possession, of course. Austin's going to be pinned in, and I expect Cincinnati's quality with those players, Evander Denke, to show. I think this is a really good price for a team that is on less rest, played a decent lineup, and also has more games to worry about in the coming midweek. And so I think this is one that Cincinnati, for the price as well, should get by Austin pretty easily. Moving on to an all-Eastern Conference matchup, it's NYC versus Montreal. NYC with back-to-back wins now, both by 1-0 scorelines, especially an impressive victory against Cincinnati, in which it probably could have been more, but they just didn't capitalize on some really good energy and attacking situations, especially in that first half. But doing well at home, as we know, they have that unique advantage. They'll be playing at Yankee Stadium this time. I think it was Citi Field last week. But regardless, they play a Montreal side that's still no wins. They're only one of 2 teams still with no wins, including the Galaxy, which we'll get to. But lost again at home to the Union. It was 1-1 late before the Union eventually stole all 3 points. And I wouldn't even say that Montreal's goal in that situation was their own, due to the fact that, Vrioni's back, this team is healthy. Yeah, those are definitely boosts for this team, but in that instance, I think that was more so some absolutely terrible defending from the Union on a set piece that went short on a corner, and then eventually kind of just bounced its way into Vrioni's feet, and he capitalized. But regardless, NYCFC as well had their midweek game, U.S. Open Cup. They were the only MLS team to lose in the round of 32, and they lost to Pittsburgh 1-0, scoreless loss. And so this is a team that's not high on energy coming off that as well, because, you know, for me personally, I think this team's max ceiling, because of the fact that their lineup is what it is, and we'll see what they do with potential DPs in the summer. I think a play-in spot, or maybe seventh as they sit right now, is their max potential, just based on some other, just simply being just a little bit better than other really bad teams in the East. So not to praise them or anything, But for our third best bet, I'm gonna go with the under 2.5, at minus 106 odds. I think this is a good bet. I like to target NYCFC. We did it last week against Cincinnati when they played them. There was a missed penalty that went our way for sure. But regardless, you see with these away teams specifically that they always struggle to play on these baseball fields, these more narrow fields, and it just is what it is for whatever reason. That's one of these kind of systems that we really like for these unders. And with the Montreal side, is one of the worst scoring teams in the league. A lot of their games have gone under, and although they are healthy and have those boosts back with Vrioni a little bit, and he scored in back-to-back games for them, including that Canadian Championship, I think another road game here. Both these teams still, Montreal and NYCFC, both top three, or in the top third of the defensive metrics in terms of XGA, and on the other side, both kind of NYCFC kind of middle of the pack, Montreal bottom like 5 or 6 in terms of their own offensive output. And so I think once again it's a good bet. Montreal has to travel. They're still in low spirits, still looking for that win. I think that they are going to break their first win out here on the road in this situation. It's going to be have to be kind of a gritty win in this narrow field with like a 1-0 or something. But I don't expect fireworks at all. And NYCFC coming off that bit of a less rest, they did play a decent lineup in Open Cup in that loss. And they don't really have the depth to be rotating all that much. So there is going to be some tired legs. Neither of these teams really in the best spirits right now. Yes, NYCFC coming off the 2 wins in MLS play, but just with the situation-wise, I think it's a good price to target another under here at Yankee Stadium. Moving on to the other New York team's game, in which they host as well, the Red Bulls. They host LA Galaxy, sitting dead last in the West after another pathetic showing on the road to Kansas City, in which Kansas City became the first team in MLS history to win a game without getting a shot on target, because the goal they scored in that 1-0 was an own goal very early on, and then from that point on just completely sat in. LA Galaxy had some solid sequences of possession, I guess you would say, but no one could finish these kind of link ups and the crosses in. And then to add insult to injury, or whatever, injury to insult, both Paintsel and Peck went down at the injuries. Paintsel has looked way worse. He's clearly going to be ruled out for a while now, and that's a huge loss for this team that was already without him for the first month or whatever. And Peck still may be questionable for this game, but they're going to be cautious with him. And even if he does play, he's going to be, not 100%. Plus the fact that this Galaxy team already is just so lost of ideas offensively, if it is not for this dual winger system with Paintsel and Peck. So even if you just have Peck, you can just isolate him, as teams have been doing all season, and that's why this attack is bottom 5 right now in terms of their expected goals output. Red Bulls as well, it kind of bottom third, middle of the pack as well. At home, it's been kind of iffy in terms of the results, and they also had to travel a very long way to Colorado to play Colorado Springs, another side USL, in the round of 32 of Open Cup. They got the job done easily, but regardless, that's some pretty long traveling. You have to travel back to New York on only a couple days rest against this Galaxy side, and also coming off a pretty bad loss to Miami last weekend out, where they also had to travel. So it's been a lot of travel for this Red Bull team, who really as well doesn't have a great amount of depth, but Forsberg and Choupo-Moting rested in the Open Cup game, so I'm sure they'll be fresh. But regardless, I'm trusting the under as well in this one. We're getting good odds with plus 105. Red Bulls defensively have been maybe a little bit shaky. They do have an injury with Nealis on that back line. And Galaxy, of course, their defensive metrics are terrible, but I just don't think they're going to be able to possess the ball, which will lead them to kind of play maybe a little bit more risk-free and back just due to the fact that they really can't push the ball forward, especially if Peck is also out as well, which I expect. So Red Bulls will probably control the game here. They're favored to win, as they should be, because of the Galaxy's injuries, and the Galaxy missed an amazing opportunity last week to finally pick up their first win. But also with these injuries now, this one of the worst starts in MLS history through 11 games could very well continue, because this Red Bull side, as kind of average as they are on a week-to-week basis, definitely not an easier opponent than Kansas City. And the Galaxy's schedule keeps getting harder. So I think, once again, at these odds, this is probably something like a 1-0, 2-0 Red Bulls win, because the Galaxy offensively just really don't produce. And the Red Bulls are probably going to be, trying to keep the tempo high, but they're also going to be on very tired legs due to their recent travels. So I think Red Bulls get by, but this should by no means be a shootout. Orlando takes on the Revs, and it's now a 5th straight clean sheet for Orlando, but another 0-0. It's now 4 0-0 results in the last 5 games. They played a fire team that went down to 10 men, with Chris Brady, the goalkeeper, getting a red about half an hour in. And Orlando couldn't do anything from that point on to secure the 3 points. But midweek, they got the big win, 5-0 at Tampa Bay in Open Cup. And they'll play Nashville in the round of 16. They'll host that one down the line. And it's 8th versus 9th in the East here against the Revs. The Revs now really picking up steam with 4 straight wins now, all without conceding as well in MLS play. You could maybe question the quality of their opponents during this run, but that Charlotte one especially was very, very impressive, outside of maybe those other 3 in terms of the form those other 3 are in right now. But you can only beat who's ahead of you, and the Revs have definitely been turning things around and keeping clean sheets. Midweek, they also won against Rhode Island 2-1, a bit of a 50-50 lineup. Carles Hill did not play. It was mostly kind of reserves, I would say, for New England. And they do have to travel here. They travel to Rhode Island, which isn't like too far, but regardless, they're going to have to travel here to Orlando. And Orlando probably a little bit favored here just due to the nature of that. But I think neither of these teams really use too much energy or too much of a full strength lineup in their midweek games. And especially with the Revs, also this coming midweek in week 13, they'll have they'll be one of those teams on a bye. And so maybe they can push a little bit more in this game. But Orlando, once again, Atuesta has been out a little bit. He's kind of, for me, I think, one of those key midfielders for them in terms of how much attacking output they can have. But regardless, I think Orlando just has the edge in this one. I think one of these teams' clean sheet streaks has to end. Maybe it doesn't, because Orlando just loves their 0-0s. But I'm going to say Orlando squeaks this one out 2-1 against the Revs team that, despite their form recently, I think it's a little bit unsustainable to continue just winning games like this, especially due to the fact that 5 of their last 6 games in all comps have been on the road. And now you're going down all the way to Florida, which is a long trip. It just plays a toll. And I think Orlando's energy will just be a little bit better, and they'll come out to a bit of a lead, and the Revs will be a little bit more exposed on that end. So I think Orlando gets it done 2-1. It's the number 1 versus number 2 in the East, as the Crew go on the road to face Philly. The Crew are well rested for this one. 2 wins in a row after suffering their first loss of the season against Miami. They beat San Jose and Charlotte in the past couple of weeks. Meanwhile, the Union had a midweek game, U.S. Open Cup, and it took them extra time, the full 120 minutes, to get by Indy 11. And they'll face Pittsburgh in the round of 16. Pittsburgh is the only USL side left in the Open Cup. And last time out in MLS play, they went on the road to beat Montreal. And it's now 3 wins on the bounce in terms of MLS play. They've really been getting it done from an attacking perspective. But this is the Gazdag return game after being traded only about a month ago. And he is questionable for this one. He's picked up an injury in the last week or so. And it's just, I think, it's a true questionable status. So we may not get that actual reunion or revenge game on either side of things. But this is one that's going to be very tight. Both these teams, by the metrics, are very good on both ends. And it really just comes down to the quality, the tactics. I think it should be an open attacking game. And if any team, for me personally, has the ability to steal the win or get the win, I think it's the crew going on the road, non-C system, no matter who the players are, really, just are able to get the job done. And the Union are just a little bit more tired, even though they get to stay at home during this past week or so. Um, did use a lot of energy in that Indy 11 game and are on a little bit less rest. So I think this one will be something like a 2-2 draw. Maybe some fireworks, a good showcase for two of the East's best teams, but I think maybe lean the crew a little bit if I were to have to choose a team to win. But I'm going to be a little bit boring. I say the points are shared in this one, but if Gazdag plays, that could definitely swing the tide towards the crew very favorably. Moving on to the West, where it's Dallas taking on RSL. It's 9th versus 10th. Both these teams coming off of losses in Week 11. Dallas was the only of these two teams to play an Open Cup, and they got by AV Alta 3-1. So, kind of normal business. And they played kind of a 50-50 lineup in terms of who was out there. Acosta got a decent amount of run as well. And Peter Musa finally is on track to return for this game in some fashion. Probably not a start, but that's a big boost for this team that, has kind of had iffy results here and there. Yes, they got that amazing comeback against Miami. It was against a pretty rotated squad in that situation, though. And they're coming off a long road trip, 4 in their last 5 games at the very least, and they just got bounced by San Diego 5-0. So it's going to be good for them to be at home, but they also haven't had the most convincing results at home this season. I think it's just 1 win at home in about 4 attempts or 5. And an RSL side that, despite losing to Vancouver last week, has its dangerous moments, and Diego Luna has been playing out of his mind this season, carrying them to results. So this is one where I think RSL could definitely steal a point, but it's going to be tight, and they're also on a road trip of their own, really going here, there, and everywhere. And so going down to Dallas after going to San Diego and Vancouver isn't the easiest ask, but I think there's just not much separating these two teams, and the fact that Dallas played midweek, I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. Next up, it's another Western matchup. It's the Dynamo versus Seattle. We've already seen this matchup earlier this season, in which it was another 0-0 between these teams. And the Dynamo sitting second from last in the West with just 2 wins this season, but last time out lost to LAFC. Meanwhile, Seattle has been back on track the past several weeks, 3 wins in their last 4 matches, and really beat the brakes off St. Louis in their last home match, even despite not having Jordan Morris. And Ferreira now also dealing with a bit of a knock and questionable for this one to return. We'll see if he gets any run, but regardless, Musovski and a little bit more of this depth has been showing their quality for Seattle. Meanwhile, Dynamo had a midweek game, played at Phoenix Rising, and it took them extra time as well to eventually come out to what looks like a convincing 4-1 win, but it was, it was a tie, and then it went to extra time, and then they really ran away with it late with a couple of assists by Linger, their new signing, who has been loving life in Houston in the first month or so already. And they'll play Austin in the round of 16, but in this one, I mean, the goal line is one of the lowest of the week. It's around 2.25, so it's not expecting many goals, and that's just what happens when these two teams match up. But I think I have to favor Seattle in this one, even though they are on the road in Houston here. Should be favored, and they'll probably pull out something like a 1-0 win, because Houston's defense still, to me, is not that same level that it was, especially last year and just this season. It's really hard for them to pull out wins even at home. Both their wins are at home, yes, but on this little rest with the travel and less rest that they've been facing, I think Seattle's depth just a little bit gets the edge, and this should be a low-scoring game. It's one that Seattle will relish. It's just kind of what they kind of do and come out with results with. We've seen that at Dallas, at Colorado. They're coming out with at least a point, and they tend to be lower scoring games. So I'm going to go 1-0 for the Sounders. We go back to the East, where it's Nashville versus Charlotte. It's 5th versus 6th. These two teams already played about a month ago, where Nashville looked like they were going to take all 3 points, and then Zimmerman went down with the nasty head injury that he's still dealing with from that match, and still not looking like he's going to be ready to go for this one. He's been out for the past, now it's going to be 5 weeks, and after that injury he suffered in the last 15 minutes or so, Charlotte turned things around in that match to win 2-1. And so these teams meet again since then. Both have been on kind of in iffy form recently. Charlotte now with back-to-back losses. We know about their away form. It's not convincing at all. And here they're in another away match on short rest. Both these teams on short rest in terms of the games they played, because they both played in Open Cup. Both advanced pretty convincingly against their respective opponents. But Charlotte, the one that has to travel for this one here against a Nashville side that has really been turning it up compared to this Charlotte side in the past couple of weeks. Obviously, that statement 7-2 win over the Fire, but then also coming back to draw against Atlanta, and a team that really didn't use too many players in their game for the Open Cup game compared to how many kind of certified starters that Charlotte did. And so I think Nashville has a pretty good case to get revenge here. Being at home, they're one of the best attacking teams in the league. And once again, I just can't really trust Charlotte to pull out results against even middle of the pack teams in really either conference. Their only road win this season has been against Montreal, who was winless. So, you have to consider these things, and I'm not really going to believe in the Charlotte team until I see it. And so I think Nashville at least gets the draw on this one, probably edges it out 2-1. Next up, it's a Western matchup with St. Louis City hosting San Diego FC, and differing results in terms of Week 11. St. Louis City, as we know, has been really starved for wins. Just the one on the season against Seattle, and then last time out in that second game against them, they got battered 4-1. Meanwhile, San Diego bounced back from 3 straight losses to win 5-0 against Dallas at home. St. Louis, the only of these two teams that had an Open Cup game. They got the job done against Omaha, and they get to stay home in this one and welcome San Diego. And San Diego has slipped in terms of their, how strong that defense has been. It's kind of regressed to the mean a little bit. We know they're a team that loves to have possession. St. Louis City, not a team that can really retain possession as well. But San Diego dealing with some injuries with Kumado and Maiton. Kumado on that back line, the right back. And we'll see if Lafelsend becomes that makeshift right back again or not. But also the fact that I think St. Louis City is on track to get a little bit better now. Lewin has finally returned from his personal matters that he's been out for several weeks. He played in the Open Cup a little bit, so he should be kind of in form in terms of his fitness, and that kind of definitely helps the midfield. Not that with him before it was like anything amazing, obviously, but that's a key player that can help that midfield. And also you have the signing of Jean De Silva from Atlanta, who has finally gotten a couple games now, including the Open Cup in midweek, to get his own fitness and kind of chemistry with this club. And he's a really dynamic player. And you have the fact that a couple of these main attackers, like Tykert, like Klaus, didn't play the Open Cup. They were fully rested. And so I think there's going to be a good chance for St. Louis City to really pounce on a kind of the San Diego defense that's been falling down the rankings a little bit. San Diego top 6 in both metrics from an XG standpoint and XGA. They're bottom 6 in XGA, and top 6 in XG. Meanwhile, St. Louis, we know their metrics aren't the greatest, but I think this lineup now that they have just a little bit with the signing of Jean De Silva, Pompeu finally getting a little bit healthier and playing full shifts. I'm really interested to see what this lineup is from St. Louis City. I think they can maybe have a little bit more verticality and actual pace to, kind of capitalize on some San Diego mistakes, because we know St. Louis will press. And San Diego, in their recent losses have had some issues with kind of dealing with presses, despite the fact that they love having the ball. Sometimes they have looked a little bit unsure of themselves during the grind of this season now that we're in. And so for this fifth best bet, that's where I'm going. I'm going with both scoring over 2.5. I think there could be fireworks in this one, and that's what I expect. San Diego, of course, is going to want to try and keep the tension down and kind of keep the energy down. But I think St. Louis City can actually counter in this instance with the tactics that are at play. I think they have a good chance, and I think we see goals in this one, and San Diego as well. I think this is one where St. Louis City can definitely look to bounce back and actually put on a show for their home fans against the San Diego side. It has been kind of washy, and especially on the road here. And coming off a big win for St. Louis City midweek, I think they could build that momentum. And who knows who wins? I think St. Louis City has a good chance at it actually, but I think neither can really keep the other off the score sheet, and we eventually will get that third goal. We stay in the West again with the Rapids hosting the Earthquakes. The Rapids weren't in the Open Cup this year, and the past 3 weeks winless with 2 draws and a loss on the road to DC. And San Jose on the other end, a big win against Portland to bounce back from 3 losses in a row of their own. And they followed that up with an Open Cup win against Sacramento Republic at home 2-1, in which was kind of once again a kind of a 50-50 lineup in terms of how full strength they went and how many reserves they played. But they'll get another chance at the Timbers at home in the round of 16 as well. But once again, the Quakes are going to be on a little bit less rest. The Rapids do have to travel back from that trip to DC. But we know the Quakes. We know how they play their games usually, as you can see from these score lines, are very high scoring, very entertaining from a neutral perspective. And that's kind of the risk they run. They'll get away with it sometimes, but I think this is one of those times where, considering the situation and the fact they played midweek, the Rapids will bounce back and put the Quakes to the sword. Bassett's really the only one missing for this Rapids side. In terms of an injury, Kude Pietro has been getting some run recently, and it's going to be, I think this team's really going to step up a level once he gets implemented in that lineup a little bit more and actually gets his fitness because he was on the bench for that DC game. But yeah, I think San Jose has as good of a chance to win this one too, though, because of their attacking talent and just the style of play that they play. But I think Colorado in this one at home with that altitude against the team on less rest, I think they'll bounce back from this one. But Colorado has burned me too much. I think their 3 losses this season, I've been on them each time, so I've just picked them in, I guess, really unfortunate spots from a betting perspective. And yeah, I'm going to say the Rapids get this one done 3-1. To wrap up Saturday slate, it's Portland hosting KC. We saw this matchup about a month back where Portland really took it to Kansas City on the road with a 4-2 win. Got out to the goals early, but in that game against San Jose, kind of were left a little speechless. I mean, 4-1 on the road to the Quakes. We knew it was going to be a high-scoring game, but the Timbers really didn't contribute on their end. And also with the fact that Crépeau played with Pantemis out, I think it was due to suspension. And, if Crépeau is in, that goalkeeping situation immediately becomes worse. I think Pantemis has definitely earned that starting role. And meanwhile, on KC's end, like we mentioned, the first team in MLS history to win a game without getting a shot on target, winning with an own goal against the Galaxy, and then just really sitting in the rest of the game, not really getting too many solid counterattacking opportunities or really committing themselves, I guess, to the effort, especially in the final half an hour or even longer than that. But the Timbers played midweek. They beat Tacoma Defiance 3-2. Played a pretty decent lineup in that. Kelsey played the whole way. And so I feel like Mora is going to start this one just like he did at San Jose. And honestly, I personally prefer Kelsey for their, just in terms of who should be the starting striker through and through. Like if you had to choose one for a one-off game, I think he eventually will become that guy and has the more upside at this point because Mora is definitely a little older. But regardless, I think as we've talked about last week too, Timbers' attacking metrics have been a little bit unsustainable despite the recent scorelines that they've had with that 4-2 win, with that 3 against LAFC, 4 against KC. Jonathan Rodriguez still not fully back in the mix in terms of consistent starts, and Kansas City as well. Their metrics are just terrible on both ends. And so Portland should rightly be favored in this one, but I think it's going to be a little bit tough. I think Casey's going to kind of play that same type of style, and they're not going to get really too many opportunities against this Timbers side. And I think the Timbers will do the double against Kansas City It probably won't be too easy though, or too straightforward, just due to the fact that they did play that kind of a decent lineup against Tacoma Defiance midweek. But I still think they get the job done. I'm gonna go for a 1-0 or a 2-0 win for Portland. Sunday slate features just one game, and it's Sunday night soccer between the West Best versus one of what we thought would be the West Best, but still climbing up the standings in recent weeks. It's the Whitecaps, who are in first, against LAFC, who's in fifth. And the Whitecaps, I mean, what can you say? Impeccable form. They're in the Champions Cup final against Cruz Azul, which will be at the start of June. And now they kind of have a little bit more rest between match days now. And they also are off for the following midweek in week 13. So they have the full week off entering this game, and they get to put their full energy towards this game. Meanwhile, LAFC, coming off still unbeaten in the last 4 weeks, got a pretty straightforward win against Houston. Probably could have been more, but eventually it only ended up being 2-0. As we know, for the Whitecaps, Ryan Gaul's been out for quite some time, and I'm sure they're going to continue to be cautious with his status. And if he were to surprisingly be finally ready for this game, it would have to be on the bench. But the most recent development has been with Brian White's hamstring injury, and so expected to be out for this one, or at the very least doubtful, due to what he's dealing with. And although Daniel Rios has definitely put in some really good starts for this Whitecaps team, you have to consider that, of course, this team's attacking potential goes down if their main man, Brian White, isn't playing. But on the other end, this midfield has been balling. Berhalter, Kubas, Vite, they all have been pouring in, not even just assists, but goals themselves, getting into these high positions and playing kind of almost like these false nine roles to get goals on the board. You think about that, amazing away leg at Miami in the semifinal with Berhalter scoring and providing some assists. Like, it really doesn't matter, because their attacking energy, their ability to retain possession, and just the quality of the service they're able to provide to each other, it's absolutely relentless. And LAFC is going to have to sit in. That's just the nature of them. And so Vancouver's going to possess the ball a lot. They also, like I mentioned, Vancouver doesn't have another game to worry about midweek after this, and are really going to put in their full energy. So I think the Whitecaps will continue to dominate and show that maybe they really are. I mean, it's almost undeniable at this point, but we are only a third into the season, so things can certainly still change. But it just seems like the Whitecaps are super legit, and they're going to continue to show that against what should have been, or what we all predicted, I guess, to be one of the West's top 3 teams. And if they make a statement win, continue to do that against this team, well, that's going to be very, very impressive. So I'm going to say the Whitecaps do that, regardless of the White injury as well. And I say they get it done 3-1. Thanks for tuning in once again, everyone. Let me know what matchups you're looking forward to the most this weekend. Make sure to like the video down below and subscribe to the channel as a reminder. And I'll see you all in the next video.